Goramahagat Laskahirlik, and I note your comments about time, and I note that
you're entitled to 8 minutes. I'm not putting pressure on you.
Thank you.
I just have to indicate I have to adjourn.
I'm conscious that even if I were to finish within 1 or 2 minutes, I think it's fair to say that we wouldn't have space to accommodate everyone who wishes to speak, and indeed to have the Minister's response and Senator O'Donnell's very important response. So, in conscious that the debate will be adjourning at 6:30, I very much hope we'll be able to come back in very early course to continue this important debate. I do wish to welcome the Minister, David Stanton, to the House, and I very much also wish to welcome the opportunity to debate this important bill and to commend Senator O'Donnell for her initiative in bringing it forward and giving us the opportunity to debate sentencing, and specifically sentencing for murder. And of course to welcome all of those present in the gallery, particularly those from ADVIC, and to say that I've had the pleasure over many years of working with ADVIC. Indeed, it is a good deal of time ago that I worked with ADVIC and with members of ADVIC on seeking to reform the law on a number of important respects for the families of those who have so tragically died through homicide. And just to pay, as Senator Norris and others have done, to express my own sympathies to you all on your tragic losses, and really to commend you on continuing to work and to provide advocacy for families who have lost loved ones in this way. Some important reforms that ADVIC has fought for and succeeded on that need to be noted include reform of the law on victim impact statements to ensure that the families of homicide victims have the right to give a victim impact statement in court. And that was something that had grown up in any case through practice, but which has now been done through statute. And one reform that I worked with ADVIC on some years ago was to ensure that reform of the provocation defence, so that where a defendant in a murder trial sought to impugn the character of the deceased through raising the defence of provocation, that there would be protection placed on the deceased in that, and we did that through Section 33 of the Criminal Procedure Act 2010, which provides that permission must be sought where the character of the deceased is being impugned, and indeed where that the accused in such a scenario potentially loses their shield, in other words, loses protection against having their own character and bad prior convictions brought in. So I just say all this really to illustrate what has been done already in respect of victims of homicide and their families, and that's very important to note. I also, like others, like Senator McDowell and others, would support this bill going passing second stage. I understand we won't have that opportunity to make that final decision, but I also understand that we're having this debate in a context where the parole bill is going through the Dáil this week and will be going before the Seanad, will be coming before us in the Seanad next week, and where we've just recently passed in the Seanad the Judicial Council bill, which makes the very important reform providing for sentencing guidelines. And I, like others, have always argued for sentencing guidelines to be put in place. I think those are very important, that we would provide a structured framework within which judges may exercise discretion. And as Senator O'Donnell has said, I think it is very important that we emphasise judicial discretion in sentencing. I don't agree with mandatory sentences. Indeed, I think we need to open the debate about whether murder or any other offence should attract a mandatory sentence at all. I know Senator O'Donnell's bill has a more modest proposal to provide for judges to set out minimum terms within a mandatory framework. I wonder, should we instead be looking at reform of the mandatory framework altogether? I'm very conscious of the Lynch and Whelan case, and indeed the case before the European Court of Human Rights, which they lost in 2014, in which that court ruled that granting of temporary release did not terminate a life sentence. And of course we know that the persons sentenced to murder are released only on licence. And I'm cognizant also that we do have a very established rule providing that the and indeed enshrined in the Constitution in Article 13.6, as Senator McDowell said, where the executive has the power to remit sentences, where we do indeed have some very established rules around early release, not only the executive power to commute or remit any sentence, but also provision for remission under the prison rules, and indeed the power of temporary release. And I don't need to say to this Minister, who who chaired our Justice Committee report on penal reform in 2013. But clearly there is a requirement, and indeed we recommended this in 2013, a requirement that we have reform of sentencing practice, and reform in particular of early release, or what we called then backdoor strategies. And in 2013, in our subcommittee on penal reform, adopted by the full Justice Committee, we recommended 5 specific reforms of sentencing, and the Minister will recall among those was the recommendation that we would seek to reduce prison numbers, recognising that far too many people are being sent to prison for far too short terms for non-violent minor offences. And I know this is somewhat off the point, since today we're discussing the most serious offence, that is murder, and the sentence for that. But I think when we're debating sentencing strategy more generally and looking at prison numbers, it is worth remembering that the majority of people being sent to prison in Ireland are being sent to prison for short sentences for non-violent and minor offences. And it does have to be asked, what is the point? If we don't have time to rehabilitate people in prison, then why don't we look at alternatives? Why don't we genuinely see prison as a sanction of last resort, as we recommended in 2013? I think that should be our overarching strategy in sentencing. Could I finally just say that I do support, however, Senator O'Donnell's proposal that we look more broadly at sentencing for murder, and I would support a more overarching reform. And I think, Senator, you have approached this in the best way, the best tradition of the Seanad, which is looking to compromise, saying that you're willing to accept amendments, and wishing to work with the government and with those of us who have a long-standing interest in penal reform and in sentencing to try and achieve a positive reform for all of us, and particularly for victims of crime and their families.
Thank you, Senator.